Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show.
If you should awaken, I will be there when you wake from your lovely
Welcome back to the show, everyone. We have a very interesting couple of chapters today. It's going to be the recovery, and we're going to talk about how it was right after the flood, what the process was therein. Now, I would also like to talk somewhat about my journey to get to this place. People have been kind of asking what brought me here, and I need to talk a little bit more how all this came to be. So I won't tell you all of it today, but I'll just tell you a little. What happened with me really was I had a very difficult time listening to ministers. I stopped listening to ministers about 25 years ago, basically because they weren't telling me anything new or anything I could use, and this had been going on for 40 years. And it really bothered me. I would talk to very, very intelligent men, masters at what they do, but the things that they were talking about were reminding me of things I had learned in vacation Bible school. And I felt like if they can't teach me anything new here, I'm not going to be able to sit here and listen to them. So eventually, I kept going to church because, to be quite honest with you, I loved going, but not for the right reason. I enjoyed church because of the way the women carried themselves at church, and especially the way they looked. But I felt like a hypocrite going to this location for the wrong reasons. That's why I want church to continue. I want to still be able to go, because of the ambience and because of all the dressed up people. I like to dress up too, and I like to hang out with well-intended people, but it's them pastors, they just keep driving me crazy with those same old stories. And I find it very difficult to ask a minister anything about creation or God, period, because they will give me they cannot answer the questions that I have. They can't give me a legitimate explanation for the Garden of Eden story. They can't give me Adam and Eve. They can't give me they can't give me Noah's Ark. They can't give me the dinosaurs. They really can't give me the kind of things that I would require to respect what they're trying to get me to sit down and listen to. I'll never forget the last time I went to church. It was about 25 years ago, and it was one of the most amazing things I've ever encountered at a church. It was West Angeles, in Los Angeles, Bishop Blake, and he had a special guest. I believe the guest was a minister from Chicago. I knew it was Chicago or Detroit because it was one of them cool places. And I sat there and I was like, okay, let me listen to what he has to say. Not expecting anything at all, especially anything special. The humble man got up and he began to speak. And the first words out of his mouth, my spirit just jumped for joy. And as soon as I heard these words, I was like, what? The reason I was so shocked was because it was a word I had never heard in church before. And I knew I was going to hear at least something new. And upon hearing that first word, I started looking around to try to find something to write on. And then he said the second word. No, wait a minute. The first word was die, oxy, ribonucleic acid. And when I heard these words, I kind of jumped for joy out of my seat because I knew today I was going to learn something finally in church. And I reached over at one of those fans and I immediately started writing down this word, deoxyribonucleic acid. I was so excited. Today I'm going to learn something. And I'll never forget that day in church. It was very amazing, and I'll never forget it. That was 25 years ago. And I still don't remember the sermon about the deoxyribonucleic acid. All I remembered was that it stood for DNA. And I was like, wow, today I'm going to get to find out what DNA is. So he began to speak. My point is, church wasn't the place for me to go to learn. And I knew it wasn't the place to go to look at women. Now, my father, on the other hand, his father was a bishop, and I don't mean to throw him under the bus, but I know for a fact he doesn't watch this channel. So I'm going to tell you what he told me. He said one day he got up to go to church. He arrived there and sat. Good sermon and everything, and he left church around 10 o'clock. And he was driving home, and he happened to notice another church that was just starting. And he noticed this beautiful woman walking down the street and going into the church. And my father, just like a champ, he rushed over and parked his car and got into the church as fast as he could, and he found that woman that he was so attracted to. And then he went and sat down next to her and very reverently sat quietly through the whole entire sermon. Just paying attention, saying amen, I imagine, every now and again. And eventually, church let out, so he immediately kind of looked over and said hello to the woman. Hello. And then he asked her, did you enjoy the service? And she said, yes, I did. And he said, well, what was your favorite part or whatever? All I know is the man was dating her the next week. He went through all of that just for a date. So I don't feel guilty for looking at women at church. if I could just get past the preachers. Anyway, so one of my hopes, one of my dreams is that we can give people a little more at church. So there'll be, when I found out what DNA meant, it led me down a path of science and discovery. And I eventually, once I got to the science part of quantum physics, once I understood exactly what it was from a spiritual standpoint, I asked a minister, did he know anything about quantum physics? And he said no. And I find that pretty disturbing because neither some people in religion don't know what it is, and there are people in science who don't know what it is. Einstein didn't know what it is. Let me tell you what it is. There is a free will principle. We've all heard of it, free will. Quantum physics is God's way of applying free will. Bet you didn't know that, scientists. Quantum physics is God's way of providing equal opportunity for everyone. Quantum physics is of God. This is something that I need to tell the science community because they're going to be shocked, like, what does quantum physics has to do with God? Well, I'll say this. Everything scientific has to do with God. Anything you believe you've discovered has already been created by Him. Already created by Him. And there is a way to understand it from a spiritual standpoint. This is what we're going to get into one of these days, because I would really, once you have figured this out, once you have learned this, you will be able to, a lot of people like to use this thing called manifesting. Well, we don't want to manifest. What we want to do is we want to basically use the powers of our mind to understand. Once I get into the quantum physics aspects, you will understand how a thought can be translated into an action, which will be translated into a result. That's all it is. Quantum mechanics is where a thought can be translated into an action and then into a result. And it goes way back to the double slit experiment, but we will learn all of that. I would love to teach you that because there's a lot of science. Children are growing up today a lot faster than we are, a lot more intelligent than we were. And what's going to happen is you're going to lose the body in the church, because the going there just to look at people and watch people do what people have always done is not going to be good enough. What they need is a church where young people can develop and learn things that they never knew before. I would have stayed in church. I would have became a preacher if I had heard preachers teaching. I know they're teaching, but they're teaching the Bible, which is 4,000 years old, and the stories will never change unless they change them. Unless they change them. So you got thousands of preachers teaching the same thing. That's why I don't go. But I would love to see some of you ministers put a little science in there and put a little real history. You know, in the Sumerian tablets, for instance, they have a Adam and Eve story that lasts 400 years. And here in the biblical story is a very simplified version of the same thing. Where a newly created Eve can understand a snake, it took a lot to develop these people. And in these chapters coming up, now the flood just happened. All the people are gone. Well, they didn't all go, but at least 70% of the people were gone. And so now you have a situation where everything new has to be re-educated, reinvented. You have to learn how to do everything. The people after the flood are not just going to pop up knowing everything. No, they're going to want to know who they are, how they got there, and why they're climbing out from under this mud and this rocks. And that was Hermes' job. What's so exciting about the chapters coming up are the real serious introduction of Hermes, the thrice-born, who I say is the most important human being that ever lived. I don't care if you think Jesus was. This was Jesus' teacher. This was the teacher to Abraham. He's the one who brought the civilization of people's rise as far as their evolution is concerned. Evolution is true except for the fact that the pieces are there, but listening to this, the pieces will begin to macerate and you'll be able to understand them in a way that Darwin never could have explained them. Darwin was brilliant, but he didn't know what we know today. So I want you to look at this first chapter, Recovery, and we'll be right back.
Chapter 32, Recovery. It would take several years for the land and the waters to rebalance themselves. The waters would be too much if the ice were too few. In the seas, life would flourish, while much of the land would be covered in thick mud and wetlands for years. Those Atlanteans that did not travel to the nearby planets created livable sanctuaries on the ocean floors. After constructing clear domes that were to be used on the planet Mars and placed at the bottom of the oceans over the palace, then removing the waters within. This was the case of the temple on the Atlantic city of Undal, which was now sitting in a dome on the bottom of the ocean and restored to its natural splendor, and Zeus and Poseidon would reside there, while Hades' underworld remained intact. Hermes migrated one group of Atlanteans to the northern part of Africa that would one day be called Egypt, and the other to the land that would one day be called Mexico. Anu and Enki returned to their original locations of Mesopotamia while setting up provinces in different locations all over the world. After the passing of 3 winters, the northern and southern poles refroze and the waters subsided. This would return all the land masses to their original size, but not with their original topography. Many mountain ranges were gone, washed away by tsunamis and tidal waves of immeasurable sizes. Land masses were forever unrecognizable, not only from the ground, but from the skies and outer space as well. Restoration and navigation became one of the top priorities, but first, the great Anunnaki land movers were back in business, changing the courses of rivers, shaping oceans, valleys, and canyons. One of the greatest planetary dredging operations were taking place in the oceans of the Pacific, where a great trench was dug deeper than any other sea canyon had ever been dug before. They called this trench the Mariana, and another great trench on the landmass in Northern America called the Canyon of Grand. The debris from the Mariana Trench was placed on a mountain peak called Everest in northern Asia, and from the Grand Canyon, a peak called K2 in Pakistan. Both mountains have elevations nearly 2,400 feet above sea level. These valleys and peaks were necessary to balance the Earth so the geomorphology of the planet was as even as possible. The corresponding canyons that were properly excavated established the balance of the mountains. It was then time to place the navigational principles back in place. And since most, if not all, mountain ranges had been erased, it was now quite difficult to recognize landing ports and ground stations. New markers were needed to be as prevalent as they were before. The main landing station was Yokogani near Okinawa, but it was underwater and unrecoverable. So it was decided that the new landing indicators would be placed in the desert in northern Africa and in Mexico. Grade markers were also needed as well on the planets Mars and on Earth's moon. These stations were important for last planet entry ports for the scanning and biochemical planetary incompatibilities. Markers would be taken from combined architectural brilliance of the two cultures from Nibiru and Atlantis. Not from them as such, but from the computer systems that they together created. With these systems, they would create something marvelous by placing necessary needs and purposes into a computer system that would then replicate the object on any scale desired. The needs were simple yet precise. Create an object that could first be seen from space and could project a beam of light from Earth to the nearest star system, perhaps Sirius B, or to the Pleiades in the constellation of Taurus. These objects then were placed strategically over the planet and on Mars and on Earth's moon. It would be created so that it would be unaffected by the next event caused by Nibiru, and sustaining its form and position for as long as the Earth exists. In minutes, the thinking machine, or computational system, could create unique structures that would have 8 sides and a very large base and an energy beacon point atop. It could be made of any material available on any planet and of any size and weight. This device would be capable of converting crystals to project streams of light to any given point in the universe, depending upon the energy output of the crystals. Once the patterns were calculated, they were then downloaded into what could only be described as a grand flying computer numerical control machine, capable of precision cutting of huge granite stones. A tractor beam would then place all pre-structured stone objects to the computational data location then set in place. These markers were created between the time of the flood and the proliferation of the new humans. All this could be done without humans in a matter of days. However, those who came up with the program would certainly take the credit for the construction of what they would forever call the Great Pyramids of the world. Enlil, after assessing all the damage that had been done by the waters, was angrily surprised to see so many human survivors. It was as if someone or something had prepared the Earthlings for the impending flood, as they found many ways to avoid destruction. Many people found refuge deep down in the many caverns that traveled deep down to the center of the earth. Others would simply climb to the mountaintop, affixing or tethering to anything possible. Out of the projected 500,000 beings, more than 300,000 would survive, as Enlil was quietly angered, knowing that someone had warned the population, giving them enough time to plan their survival. Enlil decided to assist the survivors in their efforts to rebuild their civilizations, promising no future actions such as this shall ever again take place.
Subscribe and push the like button.
Welcome back. Ultimately, I'm going to do a whole series, a whole chapter, a whole thing on the pyramid itself, simply because the pyramid is such a complex structure. And once I found out that the human beings that were here at the time were incapable of building such a structure. First of all, whomever built the pyramids, they had to know some things. Like, for instance, they had to know the exact weight of the world. They had to know the exact weight of all the planets in the solar system. They had to know the measurements from pole to pole. I don't mean from the exterior of it only, but the interior as well. They had to be able to balance it in such a way that it would only be off by less than 1 inch. It had to be so accurate. Now, the problem with that, with all the instruments we have today, we cannot build a building that accurate after 4,000 years. And then when you find out, you discover the pyramids are a lot older than the civilization that was there. So thank you for coming. Please subscribe. It's about to get good here because we're going to really get into the deep. And at the end, we have a revelation for you as well. Thank you for coming. Please like and subscribe and press the like button. Bye-bye.
I'll be there when you wake from your love. Your
Subscribe and push the like button.